My name is Rachel Miller. I am 36 years old, a freelance graphic designer living in Seattle, Washington. Yesterday, I returned from burying my husband in another country after a sudden illness stole him from me. 30 hours of flights, layovers, and empty airport corridors had already drained the life from me. All I wanted was for someone to meet me at the terminal. So, I sent a message to our family group chat. Flight lands at 3 p.m. Can someone pick me up? My brother's reply arrived seconds later. It was only 4 words, but they cut deeper than anything I had ever felt before. Before I tell you what he said, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and hit like and subscribe if you have ever been let down when you needed someone the most. This is where everything began to change. The water made a thin, whispering sound as it slid under the door, a steady thread that did not belong to a home left empty for weeks. I climbed the porch steps and pressed my gloved palm to the wood. Cold. The lock turned too easily. Inside, the air hit me like a wall. Colder than the porch. Stale, bitter, the kind of cold that lives in the bones of a house and refuses to leave. I stepped into the entryway. The sound grew louder. A distant hiss, a stutter, then a relentless rush. I flicked the light switch. Nothing. The bulbs hung there, dull glass eyes, useless against the dim gray of a winter afternoon. I could see my breath as I exhaled. It lingered in front of my face like a little cloud that did not know where to go. I rolled my suitcase across the hardwood and felt it stick. The wheels carved 2 wet streaks through a thin sheet of water. Under the door to the dining room, a wider ribbon of water spread like a spill no one could clean. I followed the sound, each step squelching, the hem of my jeans growing heavy. The kitchen told the story in one glance. A hairline crack along the ceiling, an ugly, jagged mouth widening with every second, water dripping, then pouring. It cascaded over the cupboards, hammered the sink, pooled on the tile, and flowed out across every path a room could offer. The thermostat on the wall blinked a single blank rectangle. I stood with my hands at my sides and listened to my heart. It beat too fast, like it was trying to catch up to the weeks behind it. I whispered Daniel's name. The word went nowhere. I set the suitcases against the wall and waded to the utility closet. The handle of the main valve was an iron wheel as cold as lake water. It would not move at first. I braced my shoulder against the frame and turned with both hands. The wheel jumped, screeched, then finally gave. The roar in the pipes eased to a shaky cough and died. Silence returned in a new shape. Water still dripped. The refrigerator hummed and then choked, a tired animal past saving. The ceiling creaked. My breath came out ragged. The floor was a shallow lake dotted with floating crumbs and a lone lemon that had rolled from somewhere and stopped by my boot like a marble sun. I checked the breakers in the basement out of habit. The stairs were wet and slick. I went slowly, one hand on the rail. The basement was a low gray cave, ankle-deep in freezing water. I tilted the panel door open with 2 fingers and saw a constellation of tripped switches. My hand hovered. The warning I had read somewhere years ago surfaced from nowhere. Water and electricity do not forgive mistakes. I pulled my hand back and set the metal door gently in place. Back upstairs, the cold had deepened. It curled around my shoulders and settled between my shoulder blades. I could feel the outline of the house in it. Empty rooms. Closed doors. The closet where his favorite sweater still hung. I swallowed and opened the group chat. I typed, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the way the day had piled upon the weeks. The house is flooded. No heat. Power seems off. I need a place tonight. The dots pulsed. My brother's reply came first. Working on a client dinner. Do you have insurance? Then my mother. We have bridge club here tomorrow. We cannot host in this state. Try a hotel. Then my father, late as always. Roads are icy. Drive safe. I put the phone down on the counter. The screen lit the water in a small square of light. I pulled a chair away from the puddle, and Saturday my gloves were wet. I took them off, spread my fingers, and watched them redden in the air. I dialed plumbers until the numbers blurred. All of them said the same thing in different voices. The storm hit everybody. Tuesday at the earliest. Some said Wednesday. I said thank you in the voice I reserve for people who are not at fault for the way the world collapses. I took the mop from the pantry and pushed the water toward the back door. It felt ridiculous and necessary at the same time, like tidying a suitcase in a car crash. The mop head soaked and dripped and did nothing a machine could have done in minutes. But the motion gave me something to do with my hands while my mind replayed two messages in stark, unforgiving lines. We are busy. Get an Uber. Why did you not plan better? I closed my eyes and saw the hospital hallway in Singapore. The shape of the fluorescent lights. The shade of white on the nurse's shoes. The way Daniel's hand looked under the sheet. How I kept smoothing the blanket even after the nurse had, like a ritual that might keep him here. When I opened my eyes, the sun had slid lower. The gray at the windows leaned toward night. I could feel the cold sharpening. I needed heat. I needed dry clothes. I needed food that did not come from a vending machine or a plastic box. I climbed the stairs and stepped into our bedroom. The bed was made but not warm. The duvet felt like paper. I opened the closet. His flannel hung where he had left it, sleeve tipped over the hook like it had leaned to listen to something. I brought it to my face. Bleach and dust. I held it anyway. I changed into dry socks and a heavy sweater. My fingers were clumsy on the buttons. In the bathroom, the mirror fogged from my breath alone. I wiped it with the back of my hand, saw the red rims of my eyes, the way grief had changed the shape of my mouth, then looked away. Downstairs, I pulled the portable space heater from the hall closet and set it on the kitchen counter. I thought about the water, the outlets, the danger threading invisibly through the walls. I unplugged it and set it aside. Not this way, I told myself. Not one more careless risk. I found crackers in the pantry and ate them slow, one by one, as if chewing could buy me time. I texted my neighbor Diane across the street, the one who always waved from her porch in summer. Back home. House issues. Might be offline for a bit. She did not respond. Maybe she was visiting her sister like she had planned. Maybe her phone was dead. Maybe anything. Outside, wind began to move through the trees. The sound slid across the roof. I turned off the water at the sink, though nothing ran. Habit. I gathered the few dry towels I had and laid them along the doorway to stem the thin river that kept seeping under the frame. It worked for 5 minutes. Then the water found a new path. My phone buzzed. A message from a number I did not know. Michael from the restoration company. Heard about widespread damage. We can put you on a list. Earliest assessment Wednesday. I typed thank you and stared at the word. It looked small on the screen. My brother sent a link to an article about preventing burst pipes, as if information could rewind the month. My mother sent a photo of an arrangement on her table, winter roses in a glass bowl, white candles lit on either side. Lovely setup for tomorrow. Do not worry. Things settle down. I set the phone face down and let the screen go black. The house creaked, a long slow exhale. A drop fell from the kitchen light and landed on my wrist. Another followed. I moved the chair back and listened to the tick, tick, tick of water meeting tile. Each sound was a metronome marking out a slow music I did not recognize. I went to the basement again, careful on the steps. The cold down there had a different quality, more intimate, like the underside of a stone. I aimed my phone's light across the floor. Water shimmered up to my ankles. The panel glinted from the far wall. I looked up at the joists, at the thin rain seeping between them. I could see where the pipe had burst, a clean split along a run that should have been wrapped. The insulation above it hung down like a tired gray scarf. I told myself to leave the panel alone. I told myself to go back up, to call a hotel, to lock the door and walk away. But the thought of stepping back into the night, of driving across a city that had not kept him for me, that no one had prepared for me, tightened my chest until I could not breathe. I reached for the panel door. My boot slipped on the slick concrete. My left hand flew out and caught the metal edge. Quick bright pain shot up my forearm. I jerked back, heart hammering. The world tilted for a second. I stood still, breathing shallow, the water licking at my ankles. Then I turned and climbed the steps slowly, each tread negotiable only if I watched my feet. Upstairs, my breath smoked the air again. I felt light-headed. I set the kettle on the gas stove and turned the knob. The igniter clicked once, twice, then caught with a low blue halo. The sound of water heating steadied me. When the kettle sang, I poured slowly into a mug and wrapped my hands around the heat like it was the last kind left. I took the mug to the living room and sat on the sofa. It was cold, but it was mine. My phone on the coffee table blinked with a low battery warning. I ignored it. I did not want the light to tell me anything else. I drank half the tea. The steam rose and softened the air around my face. The room swam a little. I leaned back and closed my eyes. Somewhere between one breath and the next, a new sound layered itself under the old ones. Sharp, insistent chirp. Then another. Then a long, steady wail that curled along the ceiling and crawled down the walls. The carbon monoxide detector had found its voice. I set the mug down too fast. It tipped and spilled across the table, down my knees, a hot stripe that shocked me into motion. I stood and the room tilted hard. I grabbed the arm of the sofa to keep from falling. My head pulsed in time with my heartbeat. The wail did not stop. I tried to walk to the front door. My legs felt heavy, like someone had stitched stones inside them while I slept. I took 3 steps and the edges of the room darkened. My phone lay on the table, inches away. A small piece of the world that could speak for me. I stretched my fingers toward it. My hand shook, hovered, stopped. I could not seem to connect the thought of dialing to the motion that would bring the phone to my palm. Breathe. The air tasted like nothing. A nothing so complete it made my teeth ache. The wail continued, relentless. A sound that meant danger and rescue at the same time. I took another step toward the door. The floor was a cold lake under my socks. I slid and caught myself against the wall. The framed photo of our garden knocked crooked. Daniel's laugh frozen in a summer I could not reach. The room dimmed again. It pressed in, soft and heavy. I lowered myself to the sofa because falling felt like a worse kind of surrender. I lay on my side and tucked my hands under my cheek like I had when I was little, when sleep had been a doorway I could open without fear. The alarm wailed. It drilled a straight line through the center of my skull. My last clear thought was simple. I do not want to die in this cold. The thought passed through me without panic. Not a storm, but a tide moving out. Voices arrived from far away, muffled like a radio behind a wall. A knock pounded through the door. 1, 2, 3, then more, faster, louder. A woman's voice carried my name across the room. Thin and brave. Rachel. Rachel, can you hear me? I wanted to answer. I really did. But the words stayed in my chest where the heat had been when the kettle sang. Another voice followed, lower, clipped, practiced. The pounding shifted, wood splintered, a hinge groaned. Cold air flooded the entryway. A purer kind, river cold, night cold. Boots hit the floor. Water splashed. The wail cut off. Someone spoke near my ear. Stay with me, Rachel. We have you. You are safe. Hands lifted my shoulders. A mask pressed over my mouth. Oxygen moved in, a soft push, a mercy I could feel. My fingers twitched and found fabric. Sleeve. Not his. Someone else's. But the steadiness of it anchored me. The room narrowed to a tunnel of dark and breath. I moved down it without deciding to, guided by voices I could not see. The last thing I noticed before the dark took me was the pattern of a badge near my eye, a small shield of light reflecting a beam from the hallway. It flashed and faded as if it were breathing too. The house exhaled as they carried me out. The night took me in. The snow began to fall. And somewhere across the street, behind a window lit by a single lamp, Diane stood with a phone to her ear. Her other hand pressed flat to the glass, watching to make sure I did not disappear. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling above me was white and too perfect to belong to any house. The light was soft, but not natural, glowing in a way that seemed to hum in the air. I turned my head slightly and the room shifted, the corners bending, a slow tilt that made me close my eyes again. My mouth was dry, my lips cracked. There was the faint smell of antiseptic and something warm, like clean laundry straight from the dryer. A voice came from my left. "You're awake." It was calm, steady, and close. I blinked until my vision cleared enough to make out the figure sitting in a chair beside my bed. A woman in pale blue scrubs, her hair pulled back, eyes watching me without judgment. "You gave us a scare," she said, leaning forward. "I'm Nurse Sarah. You're at Portland General Hospital. Do you remember what happened?" My throat tightened. I remembered water running under the door. I remembered cold air and the sound of the carbon monoxide alarm. I remembered voices. Pounding. Being lifted. Oxygen. "My house," I rasped. "Burst pipe. Cold the alarm." Sarah nodded. "Your neighbor called emergency services after seeing water pouring out your front door. Firefighters found you unconscious on your sofa. You had moderate hypothermia, carbon monoxide poisoning, and a concussion from a fall. And," she glanced down at a chart in her lap, "some mild electrical burns on your right hand." Closed my eyes. I could feel the dull ache in my temple now, the stiffness in my fingers, the heavy weight in my chest that had nothing to do with my injuries. "You're lucky they got to you when they did," Sarah continued softly. "Another hour and—" She let the sentence fade. Her voice was warm, but her words wrapped around something cold in me. An hour more, and I would not be lying here. The door opened. A man in a dark jacket stepped in. He wasn't hospital staff. His camera hung at his side, the strap twisted in his fingers. He nodded at Sarah, then at me. "Rachel, this is Michael Chen," Sarah said. "He's with local news. He heard about your rescue. He wanted to speak with you, but only if you're comfortable." I stared at him. "News?" Michael kept his voice low. "Your neighbor told us what happened. The fire department mentioned you'd just gotten home from overseas. We're covering storm damage across the city." "But," he hesitated, "your story, it's more than that." I looked at my hands. The skin along my knuckles was raw. "You messaged your family for a ride from the airport," he said gently, "and they told you to get an Uber. Then you came home to a house no one had checked on, in the middle of winter, and almost died alone." He wasn't asking. He already knew. I swallowed. "How?" "The paramedics saw the messages on your phone when they were trying to find your emergency contacts," he explained. "They showed me. He paused, searching for the word. "It's heartbreaking." Sarah shifted in her chair, watching me carefully. "You don't have to talk about any of this right now," she said. "Your priority is rest." But Michael's voice had planted something in my chest, a small, sharp point of awareness. If this was out there, if strangers knew before my own family came to see me, then the story was no longer mine alone. I nodded once. "Not today," I said. He respected that, backed toward the door, and left quietly. Sarah adjusted my blanket, then checked the monitor by my bed. "You'll be here at least overnight," she said. "Doctor wants to keep an eye on your concussion and make sure your oxygen levels stay stable." The room settled into the quiet hum of machines and distant voices in the hallway. I let my eyes close again, drifting in and out of sleep. When I woke next, it was to the sound of hurried footsteps and the door opening fast. My brother Evan came in first, his face pale, his movements jerky. "We just saw the news," he blurted. "They're making it sound like we abandoned you." My mother followed, her voice already sharp. "This is a complete misrepresentation. We had no idea the house was in that condition. Rachel, you know we would have helped if we understood." My father came in last, slow, silent. He closed the door behind him and stood near the wall, his eyes on the floor. I didn't speak. "People are calling us," my mother went on. "Your Aunt Susan demanded to know why we didn't meet you at the airport. Your father's boss texted. The bridge club has already seen the segment." She looked at me as if this were the true emergency. "We can't let this ruin the family's reputation." Their words floated above me like smoke. I could hear them, but the meaning passed over, dissipating into something I couldn't hold. Sarah appeared in the doorway. "She needs rest," she said firmly. "If you're going to stay, keep it quiet." My mother plastered on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course. We'll sit with her. They arranged themselves around the bed like actors in a play, shifting into softer voices whenever a nurse came in, then snapping back to whispers about how to fix things as soon as the door closed. I turned my head toward the window, letting their words slide past. The sky outside was the color of wet concrete, heavy and still. A knock came, and a woman with a folder stepped in. Miss Miller, I'm Miss Patel, hospital social worker. I wanted to update you on some resources. There's been an incredible outpouring from the community. Housing, meals, transportation, home repairs. You have options for where you can go after discharge. You don't have to rely on family if that's not your choice. The air in the room shifted. My mother's posture stiffened. She's coming home with us, she said quickly. We've already made the guest room ready. Miss Patel's eyes went to me. The decision is yours. My heart beat harder. It was a simple sentence, but it felt like a door opening somewhere I hadn't realized was closed. I looked at my family. At Evan's restless scrolling on his phone, my mother's fixed smile, my father's careful distance. And for the first time since I'd landed, I felt something close to clarity rising in me. I'd like to hear about the alternatives, I said. The room went silent, then my words hung in the air like frost, delicate and irreversible. Evan's head snapped up from his phone, his eyebrows drawn tight. My mother's mouth opened, then shut, her lips pressed so thin they nearly disappeared. My father lifted his gaze from the floor, a slow movement as if it weighed more than his own body. You can't be serious, my mother said finally, her voice careful but trembling under the surface. After everything we've done. I turned my eyes on her. What exactly have you done? My tone was calm, but the words carried their own edge. Her jaw stiffened. When Daniel was dying, you were too busy to come, I said. When I buried him alone, you said the flights were too expensive. When I asked for a ride from the airport after 30 hours of travel, you told me to get an Uber. When I called about the burst pipe, you had bridge club and Evan had a client dinner. So tell me, what have you done that makes you think you should control my recovery now that people are watching? Evan pushed back his chair so suddenly it scraped the floor. That's completely unfair, he snapped. We didn't know it was that serious. I looked at him steadily. You didn't ask. The silence that followed was sharper than any argument. My father shifted his weight, his voice low. Rachel. Grief can make people say things they don't mean. I shook my head. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. For the first time I see our family for what it is, what it has always been. I've spent my entire life accepting scraps of attention and convincing myself it was a feast. Sarah, the nurse, had come in quietly during this exchange. She stood at the foot of the bed now, adjusting my chart but not looking away from me. There was a kind of stillness in her presence that steadied me. I don't hate you, I told them. But I will not pretend you can give me what I need right now, or that you would even if you could. My mother's voice dropped into a tone I had heard 1,000 times before, the one she used when she felt her control slipping. So you'd rather stay with strangers than your own family? I'm saying, I replied, that I will surround myself with people who show up without conditions. People who help because they care, not because they're being watched. Miss Patel set the folder on my lap. We've arranged a 2-week stay at the Riverview Hotel while your home is repaired. The meal delivery service will provide breakfast and dinner daily. Transportation for your medical appointments is covered. Several neighbors have volunteered to check in, and the restoration company is offering to install a remote security system at no cost. The contrast between her voice and my family's was startling. One carried warmth and intent, the other image and excuses. This is ridiculous, Evan said, his voice tight. You're choosing random people over your own blood. I turned to him and for the first time really looked, not at my brother, but at the man who had, knowingly or not, stood as the center of my parents' universe while I orbited on the outskirts. I'm choosing kindness, I said quietly. And right now, kindness isn't coming from you. My mother gathered her purse with sharp, efficient movements. "When you come to your senses, we'll be waiting," she said. "But don't expect us to drop everything again when you decide you need us." A small, humorless laugh escaped me. That's exactly my point. I never could expect that, and now I no longer will. They filed out, my father lingering in the doorway for a moment. I thought just for a heartbeat that he might say something meaningful. Instead, he nodded once, turned and left. Sarah stepped closer to my bed once the door closed. "That took courage," she said softly. "Setting boundaries with family isn't easy, especially when you're vulnerable." I let out a slow breath. "It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like giving up." "You're not giving up," she said, adjusting my pillows. "You're giving yourself permission to heal without carrying their baggage, too." The rest of the afternoon blurred into visits from community volunteers. The manager from the Riverview Hotel stopped by, assuring me my room was ready, stocked with warm blankets and food in the fridge. The restoration company's foreman showed photos of the progress in my house. Pipes replaced, the worst of the water pumped out. The meal service coordinator asked about dietary preferences, writing each detail down as though it mattered, because to her it did. By early evening, a hospital aide wheeled me out into the crisp night air. The cold stung my cheeks, but it was clean, free of the heavy dampness of my flooded home. A car from the hotel waited at the curb, engine humming. Sarah walked beside me, her hand light on my shoulder. "Take the time you need," she said as they helped me into the back seat. "Healing isn't a race." As the car pulled away, I looked back through the window. The hospital's lit windows blurred against the dark sky. For the first time since Daniel died, I felt the faintest thread of something other than grief. No joy. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of peace. The Riverview Hotel sat on the edge of the river, its windows reflecting the shimmer of city lights. My suite was warm when I stepped inside, the air smelling faintly of cedar. A potted plant sat on the desk, a card tucked among its leaves. "From all of us at Portland General, wishing you comfort and rest." I set my bag down and stood at the window, watching the water move under the bridge. Somewhere out there, my family was likely spinning their own version of this day. But here, in this quiet room, the only story that mattered was mine. And I wasn't going to give it away again. The first night in the hotel felt unreal, as if I were inhabiting someone else's life. I stood in the middle of the room for a long time, letting my eyes take in the details. Soft beige walls, heavy curtains drawn against the winter wind, a bed so wide and neatly made it could have been in a magazine. I ran my hand over the comforter, my fingers catching on the stitching. The warmth in the air felt foreign, like my body didn't quite believe it yet. I walked to the small kitchenette. The refrigerator hummed steadily, and when I opened it, I found it stocked just as promised. Fresh fruit, cartons of soup, bottles of water, even a slice of chocolate cake in a clear container with a sticky note that read, "Thought you might need something sweet." There was no name, just neat handwriting that tilted slightly to the right. I sat on the edge of the bed, cake in my lap, fork in hand. The first bite was rich and soft, melting on my tongue. I hadn't tasted anything that comforting in weeks. Halfway through, my eyes blurred, not because of the cake itself, but because someone, a stranger, had thought to leave it there. The silence in the room was deep, but not empty. It was the kind of quiet that waited, patient, instead of pressing in like the cold had at home. I could hear the faint hum of the heating system, the muffled sound of traffic over the bridge. Somewhere in the hall, a door opened and closed with a soft click. My phone sat on the nightstand, face down. I hadn't looked at it since arriving. Part of me feared what messages might be waiting. Half-hearted check-ins from my family, veiled guilt, or worse, nothing at all. After a long moment, I picked it up. There were messages, but not from them. One from Diane across the street. "Glad you're safe. The house looked bad when I saw it, but the crews are working fast. If you need me to grab anything from inside, just say the word." Another from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Maria from the Neighborhood Association. Saw your story. A few of us are putting together some care packages for folks affected by the storm. Yours will be at the front desk tomorrow morning. And one from Sarah, the nurse. Thinking of you tonight. Remember, you don't have to be strong every minute. Just breathe. I read each one twice. The words felt like small threads, and together, they started to weave something I hadn't felt in a long time. Connection without obligation. I turned off the main light and left the lamp on, its glow soft against the wall. Crawling into bed, the sheets cool but quickly warming under my body, I let my muscles sink into the mattress. For the first time since Daniel died, sleep came without a fight. The next morning, light seeped in through the edges of the curtains. I stayed in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the gentle knock at the door. When I opened it, a paper bag sat on the floor with my name written in thick marker. Inside was a loaf of fresh bread wrapped in parchment, a jar of homemade jam, and a note. Welcome back, even under these hard circumstances. We're here for you. My throat tightened. I placed the bread and jam on the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee from the machine in the room. The smell filled the space, sharp and grounding. By mid-morning, I was ready to meet with the grief support group Miss Patel had arranged. The meeting was held in a community center just a short drive from the hotel. The driver, a quiet man named Robert, greeted me with a nod and held the door as I climbed into the van. The center was warm, with long windows that looked out onto a snow-covered courtyard. Inside, a circle of chairs waited. People filtered in slowly, some with hesitant smiles, others with eyes that seemed to have forgotten how to meet another's gaze. A woman with silver hair and a soft scarf introduced herself as Eleanor, the facilitator. This is a space for honesty, she said, her voice calm and sure. There's no right way to grieve, and no expectation to share before you're ready. Sometimes listening is the first step. When it was my turn, I hesitated. My hands twisted in my lap. My name's Rachel, I said finally. I lost my husband overseas. Came home to an empty house. Things happened after that. I guess I'm here because I don't want to feel like I'm walking through this alone anymore. There were nods around the circle. One man, probably in his 60s, leaned forward slightly. None of us wanted to be here, he said. But since we are, we might as well walk together. For the next hour I listened to stories, each different, yet all marked by the same hollow spaces where someone used to be. There was a strange comfort in it, not because anyone had the answers, but because none of us were pretending. When the meeting ended, Eleanor handed me a small card. Call me if you need to talk between sessions, she said. Even if it's just to sit in silence. Back at the hotel, I found another package at the front desk, this one from the meal service. Inside were containers of hot vegetable soup, roasted chicken, and steamed rice. The aroma filled the elevator on the way up, and for a moment, I imagined bringing the bag into my own kitchen, setting it on my own counter. But when I unlocked the hotel room, it didn't feel temporary. It felt like a space holding me up until I could stand on my own again. I ate slowly, looking out at the river. The water moved steadily under the bridge, dark and endless, yet constant. In its motion, there was a quiet kind of promise, that not everything stops, even when your own life feels frozen. That night, as I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark, I realized something. It wasn't just that strangers had stepped in where family hadn't. It was that they had done it without asking for anything in return. And I was beginning to understand how much that mattered. 3 days after settling into the hotel, the restoration company called to give me an update on my house. The voice on the other end belonged to a man named Calvin. His tone was professional but carried the faint weariness of someone who had been working 16-hour days since the storm began. We've got the main water damage contained, he said. Pipes are replaced, drywall is drying out, but there's a lot of structural inspection left to do. Honestly, Rachel, it's good you weren't living there. It wouldn't have been safe. I gripped the phone tighter. How bad? He exhaled. The burst pipe sent water through the walls for hours. Kitchen ceiling will need partial replacement. The basement. We're still pumping out some seepage from under the foundation. There's also mold starting in a few spots. We're on it, but this isn't a quick job. Closed my eyes. I could almost see the house. Dark, stripped of its warmth, rooms echoing with the drip of water. Daniel's sweater still hanging on the closet hook. His coffee mug on the counter, maybe now spotted with dust. Calvin's voice softened. We'll keep you updated. The crews are treating your things with care. Anything salvageable will be packed up and stored until repairs are done. You don't have to worry about that part. After the call, I sat at the small table in the hotel room, staring at the plant from the hospital staff. Its leaves leaned toward the light, a quiet reminder that even in unfamiliar soil, something could still grow. That afternoon there was a knock at my door. Diane stood there, cheeks flushed from the cold, a grocery bag in her hands. Thought you might need some company, she said. I stepped aside to let her in. She looked around the room, her gaze landing on the view of the river. Nice place. I'm glad they got you somewhere warm. We sat on the sofa while she unpacked the bag. Fresh produce, a loaf of bread, a jar of local honey. The neighborhood's been talking, she said after a pause. About what happened. About your family. I didn't answer right away. People noticed, she went on. Who showed up? Who didn't? I know it's not my place, but... Rachel, you deserve better than the way they treated you. My throat felt tight. It's always been like that, I admitted. I just never wanted to see it clearly. Diane reached over, her hand warm on mine. You're seeing it now. And you're not alone. We talked for over an hour. She told me about her late husband, about the way grief doesn't leave so much as shift its shape over time. By the time she left, the weight in my chest had eased just enough for me to notice. The next morning, a text came from the grief group coordinator. Session today at 11. Rides available. I replied that I'd be there. The circle felt familiar now. I recognized faces, remembered snippets of their stories. When it was my turn, the words came more easily than before. I'm starting to realize, I said, that family isn't always the people you're related to. Sometimes it's the ones who see you, even if they've only just met you. A woman named Marie, who had been quiet until then, nodded slowly. Blood ties can be chains, she said. Sometimes you have to set them down so you can walk. The rest of the day passed in small, ordinary moments. Lunch at the hotel desk, sorting through forms from the insurance company, a short walk along the river bundled in my coat. The air was sharp but clear, and for the first time in weeks, I noticed the sound of birds overhead. That night, as I turned out the light, the memory of my house returned, not as a wound, but as a place waiting to be made new. Would be ready someday. And when it was, I would decide who was welcome at the door. 5 days after the news story aired, an envelope arrived at the hotel front desk with my name written in a careful, deliberate hand. The clerk handed it to me along with the day's meal delivery. Her eyes curious but polite enough not to ask. Back in my room, I set the letter on the table. It was heavier than it looked, the kind of weight that made you pause before opening it. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was my father's. We hadn't spoken since the day in the hospital when they left without looking back. I sat in the chair by the window, the letter in my lap, staring at the slow sweep of the river outside. Finally, I slid my thumb under the flap and unfolded the pages inside. Rachel, I have been thinking about the night you came home and what happened afterward. I have been thinking about more than that too, about years. Years I cannot get back, and the ways I failed to be what you needed. While your mother and brother may never admit it, I know the truth. We left you to carry too much, alone. I have no excuses that would not sound like another abandonment. I'm sorry. Not in the way people say it to smooth over discomfort, but in the way that sits heavy and does not go away. The man you married would be proud of you. I suspect he was proud long before you stood up to us. Perhaps someday, if you are willing, we could find a way forward. Not as we were, but as we could be. Ed. I read it 3 times. The words didn't erase the past, but they sat differently than anything he'd said before. There was no performance in them, no attempt to protect the family's image. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. It stayed on the table all afternoon, its presence quiet but undeniable. That evening, I attended another grief group session. Eleanor began by asking us to name something unexpected we'd received since our loss. An object, a gesture, a moment. When it was my turn, the answer rose in my throat before I could stop it. A letter, I said. From someone I didn't think was capable of writing it. There were knowing looks around the circle, but no one asked for details. They didn't have to. After the session, Robert, the driver who'd taken me to my first meeting, offered me a lift back to the hotel. In the car, the hum of the heater filled the silence until he spoke. Letters are a kind of bridge, he said. Some can hold your weight, some can't. But you won't know until you try stepping onto them. I looked out at the passing lights. I'm not sure if I'm ready to cross this one. Then don't, he said simply. It'll still be there if you decide to. The next day, the restoration company called again. The house was drying out well, they said, and they'd begun cleaning and sanitizing the salvaged belongings. Calvin asked if I wanted to visit to see the progress. My chest tightened at the thought. Said yes. When I arrived, the front door was propped open, warm air from portable heaters spilling onto the porch. The inside smelled faintly of disinfectant and wet wood. Plastic sheeting covered parts of the kitchen. The ceiling above the dining room was gone, exposing beams and the underside of the upstairs floor. But it wasn't the damage that caught me. It was the small details. Daniel's mug, carefully wrapped and labeled in a box. The photo album stacked neatly in a plastic bin. The flannel shirt from our bedroom, hung on a temporary rack away from the dust. We keep the personal things separate, Calvin explained. Makes it easier when you're ready to bring them back. Ready. The word echoed in my mind as I walked through the rooms. When I left, the air outside felt sharper, the sky wider. I realized that one day, the house would be whole again. But I would not be the same woman who left it a week later. The repairs had reached a stage where Calvin said they could start putting the house back together. Drywall would go up, new flooring would be laid. Fresh paint would cover the stains that winter had left behind. But before that happened, he asked me to come by and decide if I wanted to make any changes. I stood in the gutted kitchen, the walls stripped down to studs, wires coiled like veins waiting for skin. The emptiness was startling. It no longer looked like the room where I had made coffee for Daniel every morning, where we'd leaned against the counter laughing over dinner dishes. It looked like a space waiting for instructions. Calvin handed me a clipboard. This is your chance, he said. You can rebuild it exactly as it was. Or make it yours in a new way. The idea unsettled me. For so long my home had been built around we. The color of the cabinets, the placement of the table, even the mug hooks by the sink. All choices made together. Now it was just me. I chose a soft green for the walls, lighter than before. New cabinets in a warm oak. A deep farmhouse sink that Daniel had once said we didn't need but secretly liked when we saw it in a store. Good choices, Calvin said, scribbling notes. The next day, I met with Eleanor after the grief group. We sat in a quiet cafe near the community center. Steam from our mugs curling into the air between us. How are you feeling about the house? She asked. I stared into my tea. It's strange. Part of me feels guilty making changes without him. Like I'm rewriting our life. You're not rewriting, she said. You're continuing the story. He's part of the chapters already written. This part is yours. I let that sink in. Back at the hotel, a small envelope waited at the front desk. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Heard about the repairs. If you need help painting or moving things back in, I'm good with a brush and a dolly. Robert. I smiled without meaning to. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed simple offers like that. Help given plainly without strings. 2 days later, I visited the house again. The kitchen walls were up, smooth and white, waiting for paint. The living room floor had been sanded down, the old water stains erased. In the bedroom, sunlight pooled across the subfloor, catching on the dust motes in the air. I stood in the doorway of the closet. Daniel's flannel still hung there, untouched since the night I came home. I stepped inside, the familiar scent now faint, almost gone. Carefully I took it down and folded it. It wasn't going back on the hook. Instead, I placed it in a box with the other things I wasn't ready to decide on. Outside, the crew was unloading new materials. Calvin waved from the driveway. "You'll be in before the month's out," he called. I nodded, but inside, I knew that moving back wasn't the finish line. It was the start of living in a space that no longer needed anyone's permission but mine. The day the house was declared livable again, the air outside was sharp with the last bite of winter. Calvin met me at the curb, a clipboard tucked under his arm. His boots dusted with sawdust. "We've done our final walkthrough," he said. "Utilities are steady, heat is stable, plumbing solid. Everything's ready for you." The word ready echoed in my chest, heavy and strange. Walking through the front door felt like stepping into a photograph I almost recognized. The walls were a softer shade than before. The oak cabinets gleamed under the kitchen lights, and the deep farmhouse sink sat centered under the window. It was beautiful. And yet, the house didn't greet me with the familiar hum it once had. It was quiet, listening almost. In the living room, the space heater was gone, replaced by the steady warmth of the furnace. The hardwood floors shone where they'd been replaced. I traced my fingers over the smooth grain, remembering the warped boards I'd waded through just weeks earlier. In the bedroom, sunlight fell across the bed frame, bare without the quilt I'd packed away at the hotel. The closet doors were closed now, and I didn't open them. Not yet. That afternoon, Diane came over with a grocery bag. "Just some basics to start you off," she said, setting them on the counter. "Bread, milk, eggs, a jar of honey. Figured you shouldn't have to run to the store on your first night back." I thanked her, meaning it more than she probably knew. As she left, she glanced around the house. "It's different," she said, "but it feels lighter. Like it's yours now." I stood at the window after she was gone, looking out at the street. The snow had melted into damp patches on the pavement, leaving behind dark lines where the water had run. Later, as the light faded, I unpacked the first box from the hotel. Not all of them, just one. Inside was the plant from the hospital staff, still alive, its leaves curling toward the dimming light. I set it on the kitchen windowsill. The house still felt cautious, like it was waiting to see what I would do. So I moved slowly, choosing what came back inside. The mug Daniel used every morning. The photo album from our trip to Oregon. The book we had both marked with dog-eared pages. These went onto shelves and counters, not to fill space, but to mark it. Small anchors holding the place steady. That night, I made tea and carried it into the living room. The quiet here was different from the hotel's quiet. This silence knew me. It remembered. I sat on the sofa, my legs tucked under me, and looked around. I realized something then. This was not me moving back into the house I had left. This was me claiming it for the first time. When I went to bed, the air felt warmer than it had in months. The furnace hummed low, steady. And in that hum, I heard something I hadn't expected. "Welcome home." 3 days after I moved back in, an envelope appeared in my mailbox without a stamp. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. My mother's looping cursive, neat and practiced from years of signing cards and invitations. Inside was a cream-colored note card. "Family dinner Saturday at 6. Your father will pick you up at 5:30. We thought it was time to put everything behind us." No apology. No acknowledgement of the weeks that had passed. Just an expectation, as if my place at their table had never been in question. I set the card on the counter and stared at it while the kettle hissed on the stove. My fingers itched to tear it in half, but instead I tucked it under a magnet on the fridge, not out of sentiment but to keep it in sight, a reminder of the difference between an invitation and an assumption. That afternoon, Robert stopped by with a set of small paintbrushes. "Figured you might want to touch up the trim yourself," he said. "Makes a place feel more yours when your hands are on it." I thanked him and poured us both coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from our mugs. "Family reaching out?" he asked gently, glancing at the note on the fridge. "Sort of," I said. "But it's not about me." It's about making sure they're seen doing the right thing. He nodded. Then you decide if being seen with them is worth it to you. Saturday came. At 5:30 sharp, headlights swept across my front window. I didn't open the door. Instead, I had already sent a message that morning. Thank you for the invitation. I'm not ready to attend. I hope you understand. No reply came. The car idled for a few minutes before pulling away. I made dinner for myself, roasted vegetables and bread with the honey Diane had brought, and ate it at the kitchen table with the window cracked just enough to let in the cool air. There was no performance in that meal, no unspoken rules to navigate, just the sound of the wind and the taste of food I had chosen. Later that night, as I was washing dishes, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, a delivery driver stood there with a large cardboard box. This was ordered for you, he said, handing me a clipboard to sign. Inside the box was a folded quilt in deep blues and greens, the kind that looked handmade. A note lay on top, written in my father's hand, for the new chapter. Warm nights ahead. I ran my hand over the stitching, the fabric cool under my palm. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. But it was something placed in my hands without condition. And for now that was enough. 2 weeks after settling back into the house, I woke with a kind of restless energy that refused to be ignored. The quilt my father had sent was draped over the end of the bed, its colors catching the early light. I sat up and thought about Daniel, about the plans we'd made, the travels we'd dreamed of, and how much he believed in leaving the familiar to see the world. By mid-morning, I was at my desk with a notebook open, writing the first lines of what would become the James Daniel Miller Memorial Scholarship for International Education. It would fund students who wanted to study abroad but needed a safety net, emergency travel for family, contingency funds for unexpected crises. The things I had desperately needed and didn't have. I called our old university's foundation office. A woman named Karen answered, her voice warm and efficient. Within minutes, she was walking me through the process. Endowment structure, application criteria, review committees. You're building more than a scholarship, Karen said. You're building a safeguard. That's rare and it matters. For the next few weeks, my dining table became a workspace. Papers, drafts, and sticky notes covered the surface. Robert stopped by one afternoon to help set up a spreadsheet. Didn't know you were starting something this big, he said. It's not just about honoring him, I told him. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did. He smiled. That's how you turn loss into something that lasts. By the time spring softened the edges of winter, the scholarship was approved. I sent out the first call for applicants, and the responses poured in. Letters from students with dreams bigger than their budgets, each one carrying a piece of the hope Daniel had always carried. When the selection committee met, one name stood out. Angela Rojas, a junior planning to study in Japan. Her essay spoke of wanting to bring her small-town perspective to a global stage, and she had the kind of determination that couldn't be faked. The day I handed her the scholarship certificate, the living room was full. Close friends, neighbors, people from the grief group. The air was warm with laughter and the scent of coffee. Angela's hands shook as she accepted it. Thank you, she said, her voice unsteady. This changes everything. I glanced at the framed photo of Daniel on the mantel. For a moment, it felt like he was standing just behind my shoulder, smiling. This house, once so cold and broken, was now filled with voices and warmth. And for the first time in a long time, I felt not just like I was surviving, but building. A year after Daniel's death, I stood in the departure lounge of the airport, my passport in hand. The smell of coffee and jet fuel mixed in the air, and the low rumble of boarding announcements rolled overhead. This time, there was no frantic rush, no desperation to get somewhere before it was too late. My ticket read Singapore. I was going back, not for tragedy, but to stand at his grave on the anniversary and tell him everything that had happened since. Through the wide glass windows, planes moved slowly across the tarmac, their lights blinking against the pale morning sky. People embraced at the gate, some laughing, some crying, all wrapped in the certainty of being met when they landed. I thought about the year before, stepping off a plane into an empty terminal, dragging my luggage alone through customs. The echo of "we're busy, get an Uber" still in my ears. Now I carried something different. The house was mine again, shaped into a place that fit me. The scholarship had its first recipient, with more to come. Neighbors had become friends. Strangers had become a community. My father and I met for lunch once a month, carefully, without pretending the past hadn't happened. My mother and brother remained on the outskirts. Their distance no longer a wound, just a fact. The boarding call came. I stepped into line, my bag light over my shoulder. As I moved forward, I realized the heaviness that had lived in my chest for so long had shifted. It was still there, but it no longer dragged me down. On the plane, as the engines roared to life, I closed my eyes and pictured the quiet cemetery in Singapore, the way the morning light would fall across the grass. I imagined setting fresh flowers by his headstone and telling him, I kept going. I made it ours and mine. And I wasn't alone. The wheels lifted from the ground, and the city fell away beneath the clouds. For the first time in a long time, the road ahead didn't feel like a survival march. Felt like a life I could live.